The words cut through the sterile silence of the boardroom like a blade. Congratulations, you're fired. I sat frozen for a heartbeat, staring at the 12 blank faces lining the polished walnut table. No one met my gaze, not even Mason Caldwell, the man who had once begged me to help save this company from bankruptcy. The man now sitting smugly at the head of the table like he just won a game of chess. I'm Ryan Keller. I'm 48 years old, and until 3 minutes ago, I was the chief technology officer of Vantage, a tech firm I'd practically built with my own hands. 15 years of grueling nights, endless code, and decisions no one else wanted to make. All of it dismissed with a smile and a one-line execution. Mason's voice had that condescending calm he always used when he thought he was being strategic. He'd worn that exact expression the day he took credit for the data pipeline I engineered, or when he announced the acquisition deal with Nexora Systems, without mentioning they were planning to dismantle half our infrastructure. You're making a mistake, I said evenly, placing my key card and company-issued phone on the table. Mason arched an eyebrow, amused. Ikron. Care to elaborate? I stood, adjusted the cuffs of my blazer. I suggest someone brief the investors on what happens when the system auto-reboots in 9 minutes and no one's authorized to restart it. Dead silence. Mason's grin didn't falter, but his eyes did flicker. Just for a second. What the hell are you talking about? Board member Cynthia Green leaned forward. Ryan, what exactly did you do? Last month, I implemented an automated full system refresh protocol every 30 days. The network reboots and requires manual authorization to relaunch core services. An extra security step after the Nexora breach. The restart can only be validated by the CTO. That was me. Not anymore. Mason opened his mouth, shut it again, then spoke slowly, like a man realizing too late that he'd lit a fuse he couldn't snuff out. You're bluffing. Nope, I said, stepping toward the door. Presentation to Bluestone Capital's team begins in 57 minutes. 42 million on the line. You might want to figure out how to turn the lights back on before they walk through the front door. I didn't wait for a response. I was halfway down the corridor when the chaos started. Raised voices behind closed doors. Footsteps pounding in opposite directions. Someone shouting for IT. Another voice yelling for legal. I hit the elevator button. 8 minutes. The stainless steel doors closed just as I heard Mason yelling my name. Too late. The parking garage was empty except for my old blue Tacoma, parked in the same corner spot I'd used since we moved into this building. Mason had tried to reassign it 3 weeks ago to his nephew, claimed executive logistics or some nonsense. I started the truck but didn't drive. I waited 7 minutes. My phone started ringing. Same number. Sir 183 anonymous. Again, Hanaluent. Then again, voicemail, text. Eifern, we need to talk. I let it buzz. I didn't owe Mason a damn thing. We started Vantage in his basement in Cincinnati. Back when it was just 2 guys in a dream, he sold the vision. I built the machinery. He was smooth with investors. I was fluent in binary. We were partners, at least. I thought we were. First cracks showed 3 years ago with the state highway contract in Des Moines. I designed the entire transit control system, real-time lane tracking, adaptive signaling, predictive rerouting, 18-hour days, 6 months straight. When the governor cut the ribbon, Mason stood alone at the podium, basking in applause for his team's innovation. I watched from the crowd like a ghost. I should have walked away then, should have known that when he said our success, he really meant my spotlight. My wife, Donna, saw it coming before I did. She watched me unravel over late-night dinners, listened to my rants about meetings I wasn't invited to, projects being reassigned, clients getting promises our systems couldn't keep. He's grooming you out. She told me over grilled salmon in silence one evening. You're not his partner anymore. You're his backup plan. I defended him. I said he was just overwhelmed, that the board was pressuring him, that once things stabilized, he'd realize how much he needed me. But I was wrong. Mason started cutting me from strategic discussions, claimed he needed me on the tech side. He hired a kid named Owen Russo, fresh out of Stanford, called him my technical deputy. Owen spent more time in Mason's office than his own, asking about systems I designed, pulling my code off secure branches. 2 weeks ago, I caught him copying scripts from my restricted folders. He said Mason had approved it. When I confronted Mason, he spun some tale about redundancy preparedness and external audits. I played along, but I knew what stood for him. I knew the walls were closing in, that Owen was there not to help but to replace me. that every backup he made, every documentation request, every question about access rights was part of a plan to erase me from the architecture I built. But I had one final trick. 5 minutes. My phone lit up again. Mason, Namoasin Mason. Again, I answered. Talk fast. Ryan, listen, I may have acted too quickly in there. This wasn't personal. The board's been on me to modernize. Bring in younger talent, consult outside firms, and cut dead weight, I offered. No, Tonna. Of course not. I was trying to protect you, give you a soft exit, maybe keep you on in some kind of... You fired me in front of 12 people like I was a junior engineer who lost a laptop. I snapped. Now you want to offer me a soft exit? The system restarts in 4 minutes. Mason, and now Serena went out to your knee. Silence. What do you want? He asked finally. His voice was strained, shaky, not the confident baritone from the boardroom. I could almost hear the sweat. I want you to remember, I said, what it feels like to lose control of something you thought you could own. For 15 years, I built the spine of your company. I cleaned up your messes, covered your lies, delivered results on impossible timelines, and you rewarded that with betrayal. 3 minutes. I could hear shouting through the garage walls. They were probably tearing through the server room, trying to override protocols they didn't understand. They couldn't. I'd built fail-safes for the fail-safes. Ryan, Mason pleaded. Don't do this. I almost laughed. You already did. 2 minutes. The line went dead in my hand as I watched a small maintenance truck screech into the far end of the garage. Someone in a tie jumped out and sprinted toward the elevator with a laptop under one arm. Probably Owen. Poor kid thought he could magic wand his way through an authorization protocol he didn't understand. I leaned back in my seat and watched him vanish inside. 1 minute. Somewhere 4 stories above me, the digital heartbeat of Stratus Vantage was stuttering. Machines waiting for clearance that wasn't coming. Core services blinking one final confirmation before going offline. The system I built didn't just shut down, it retreated. Databases sealed. Backup servers disconnected. Endpoints locked behind encryption gates. I designed it like a fortress. And today, the drawbridge was up. At 0, the lights in the office tower flickered and went black. Security systems, internal comms, cloud access, even the smart HVAC controls, gone. For the first time since we'd moved into that glass and steel monument to overconfidence. The building was dead. I pulled out of the garage and drove east. No destination in mind. The roads were clear, early sunlight casting long shadows across the pavement. I passed 2 billboards advertising Stratus Vantage's next-gen urban infrastructure platform. Mason's voice still echoed in my head from the original pitch video. The future, built today. I almost choked. It was past noon when I finally stopped at a diner in Dayton. One of those places that hadn't changed since the 70s. Red leather booths, cracked menu covers, a waitress named Carol who poured coffee like she'd been doing it since Nixon. I ordered a sandwich I didn't plan to eat and watched the local news scroll across the TV above the counter. Regional software firm suffers massive system outage. Dozens of workers sent home. Sources cite internal technical issues. That was the polite version. I knew inside the building. Panic was still in full swing. Mason probably yelling himself hoarse. Owen trying and failing to convince someone he could handle this. Legal scrambling to figure out who could be blamed without causing a PR collapse. My phone buzzed. A text from Dana. Heard about the blackout. You okay? I wrote back. Yeah, better than I've been in years. At 1:42 p.m., my phone rang again. This time, a number I didn't recognize. Ryan Keller. Gerardum, a clipped voice asked. This is Mitchell Lane from Carson, Blackwell and Hunt. We represent Stratus Vantage. I believe we need to have a conversation about today's events. I stood up, walked to the front window, and stared out at the street. Go ahead. What you did constitutes deliberate disruption of business operations. You implemented unauthorized restrictions, caused the company material damage, and were estimating losses could exceed 9 figures. I smiled at the glass. So, triple what the company's actually worth. There was a pause. Mr. Keller, we can discuss jokes or we can discuss options right now. Your actions are being reviewed for both civil and criminal liability. Sabotage is not protected under any employment agreement. I kept my voice calm. I installed a standard maintenance protocol for critical systems. It functioned exactly as intended. If Stratus Vantage no longer employs a CTO capable of restarting its own infrastructure, that's a staffing problem, not a crime. You isolated access to core systems. I documented everything, submitted quarterly reports. Ask the compliance officer. Another silence. Regardless, Lane said, you created a scenario where you were the sole point of failure. That's an unacceptable security risk. Funny how nobody thought that when the system was running flawlessly, be that as it may, our firm will be recommending Stratus Vantage pursue legal action against you for damages. Unless, he paused, we can come to a resolution. Let me guess, I said, you want me to sign a consulting agreement, hand over every password, protocol, and backdoor I built for the company, and quietly disappear. Something like that. Yes, sure, man. Let me make something clear. I said, I don't respond to threats. Mitchell, if this goes legal, I will testify under oath to every shortcut Mason authorized against my advice. Every unpatched exploit he insisted we ignore to hit quarterly targets. And I'll make sure every major client knows exactly what they're trusting their systems with. You're threatening disclosure of proprietary information. I'm promising transparency about technical negligence. If your client wants to risk a courtroom, I'm happy to bring the blueprints. I hung up and sat down again, just as Carol refilled my coffee. You look like someone who just flipped the table, she said, smiling without looking. You have no idea. At 3:08 p.m., Mason called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity won. Ryan, he said, voice tight. We need to meet. In person, no lawyers. No board, just us. Why? Because this is spiraling out of control. Because we were partners once. Because I'm trying to fix this. I considered. Mason was rattled. He wouldn't be calling if he thought he still had the upper hand. Fine. I said, Langley's Diner on 5th the World, Atin. 1 hour. You pay for coffee. I arrived early and waited in the corner booth, facing the door. Dana had always said I had a flair for the dramatic. Maybe. But this wasn't theater. This was closure. Mason arrived 48 minutes later, with Owen Russo trailing behind him like a scolded intern. I raised an eyebrow. No lawyers. He's not here as legal, Mason said, sliding into the booth. He's here because you taught him everything. And right now, he went on. He's the only one who even understands what's broken. Owen didn't look up. I nodded at the waitress. 2 more coffees. Mason got to the point. What do you want? Ryan. Money. Equity. A title? Name it. I chuckled. You think this is about a payout? It usually is. You're wrong. I leaned forward. Tell me something. How long have you been planning to cut me loose? Mason shifted in his seat. 6 months. Maybe a little longer. While I was working weekends on the Bluestone contract. While I was training Owen. Thinking he was part of the team. We thought you were too close to the systems. Too resistant to change. The board wanted insurance. So you hired a clone. Groomed him to take over. And now the clone's staring at the fire you started. Wondering which way to run. Owen finally looked up. Pale. I didn't know they were going to fire you like that, he said. I thought you were leaving on your own. I nodded. That's how Mason spins everything. Mason slid a folder across the table. A standard consulting contract, $75. Euros for a 3-month transition. All IP handed over. Full access credentials. Non-compete. The works. I didn't even open it. Nuh-uh. Mason blinked. You haven't even looked. I don't need to. I already have a new job. Doing what? I smiled. Helping Bluestone Capital build a tech platform that doesn't rely on thieves. Owen's mouth fell open. Mason looked like he'd been hit with a shovel. They called me this morning. I said they were impressed by my infrastructure designs. And by the way, they knew something was wrong weeks ago. Someone on your board has been talking to them. That's impossible, is it? I leaned back, folded my arms. You've spent months gutting your company from the inside out. And now you're discovering that when you bet on greed, you end up with nothing. Mason didn't speak, not right away. His jaw twitched as if trying to chew through the truth. But his voice failed him. It crossed the booth. Owen stared at the folder like it might disappear if he didn't blink. You're bluffing, Mason finally said, but there wasn't any strength behind it. Am I? I reached into my coat and pulled out my phone, scrolled to my call log, turned the screen toward them. 6 missed calls from Carter Maddox, Chief Strategy Officer at Bluestone. I met him 2 years ago at that Smart City conference in Denver. You remember Yasunanduram, right? The one you skipped to play golf in Arizona. Owen shifted. You've been planning this. No, I said. You have. You're just upset I got ahead of your plan for once. I stood, letting the leather booth creak beneath me. Here's what's going to happen. Mason Norm, sir, you're going to lose the Bluestone contract. They'll announce the cancellation within 48 hours. You'll issue a statement blaming unforeseen infrastructure challenges, and your stock price will drop by 18% in a week. Maybe more if your other clients catch wind of how fragile your systems are. Eh, We'll recover. Mason snapped, but the sweat on his brow said otherwise. You think this company lives and dies with you? No, I said. I know it does. I paused, then added, but if you're smart, you'll try to negotiate before the others start jumping ship. I walked toward the door. Owen scrambled to his feet. Wait, Ryan, you said someone on the board's been talking to Bluestone? I turned halfway, catching his eye. Talk to Karen Beckett. She's been grooming a replacement for Mason since January, and she's not planning to go down with him. The kid's eyes widened. Mason's face went white. I walked out before either of them could say another word. Outside, the wind had picked up. A low gray ceiling of clouds had rolled in over Dayton, promising rain by nightfall. I climbed into the Tacoma and just sat there, engine off, the quiet humming in my ears. For the first time in over a decade, I had no title, no deadlines, no access badges, and yet I had never felt more in control. That night, Dana and I split a bottle of wine on the back porch. We didn't talk much. She could tell I was sorting through too many thoughts to fit into sentences. At some point, she asked, do you think it's really over? I stared at the dark horizon. Nah, not for them. Not yet. She nodded, then leaned her head on my shoulder. I didn't sleep much. My brain wouldn't shut down. Somewhere, Mason was probably tearing through every contract, every access log, every memo I'd ever written, trying to find a loophole, a mistake. But I hadn't made one. I knew that company better than he did. Hell, I was that company. At 7:15 the next morning, I received a voicemail from Karen Beckett. Ryan, Turu, I'd like to meet, privately, off record. There are things we need to discuss. I returned her call just before 9 and agreed to meet at a private conference room at the Kavanaugh Hotel downtown. When I arrived, she was already there, alone, seated with her back to the window, a laptop open and a coffee steaming beside it. She didn't waste time. How long have you had an offer from Bluestone? She asked. Since last Thursday. They reached out again yesterday after the reset. She nodded. Did you accept? Not yet, but I'm leaning that way. Good. I raised an eyebrow. You don't sound disappointed. I'm not. She said, Mason made a mistake firing you. A catastrophic one. But it's opened up an opportunity. What kind of opportunity? She spun the laptop toward me. A spreadsheet, client contracts, renewal dates. Tell me it bear weights, penalty clauses, Stratusvantage is over-leveraged. Too many promises, not enough delivery. We're months away from losing our 3 biggest clients if something doesn't change. And you think I can change that? Not anymore. Not inside the company. I leaned back in the chair. So what is this? Karen damage control, or the beginning of a coup. A little of both, she said with a calm that would have been terrifying if I hadn't already suspected it. I've been on the board 5 years. I've watched Mason bloat the company with ego while bleeding out the actual talent. You were the last barrier between him and collapse. Then why didn't you stop him? Because up until now, you weren't angry enough. I stared at her for a long moment. You think this is still salvageable? She shook her head. No, I think he isn't. But the platform? The vision? Maybe, but not under him. I smiled. But there was no joy in it. You want me to come back? None. She said firmly. I want to replace him with someone who can rebuild trust, reestablish technical credibility, and keep Bluestone from poaching every client we have left. That's not me anymore. I said, and I wouldn't come back even if you asked. She tapped the edge of her mug. Then let me make you a different offer. Come in as a strategic advisor. Limited window, 6 months. Help transition tech control. Document the systems properly and train a real team. In exchange, I push Mason out, restructure leadership, and you get a public vindication. I folded my arms. Why would I help clean up his mess? Because if you don't, it'll become your mess, your systems, your code. Terrain, your name attached to every failed deployment in the next 6 months. You don't need Stratusvantage, Ryan Masumin, but you do need a legacy, something better than a headline reading, CTO tanks company out of spite. That hit a nerve. She saw it in my face. Think about it, she said, standing and gathering her things. You've already won. The question now is, what do you want your victory to look like? I didn't answer. She didn't expect me to. As she walked out, I sat there in that quiet hotel room and realized something strange. She was right. Not about Mason. Not about the company. About me. I'd spent so long fighting to be seen, to be respected, to prove my worth, that I never stopped to think about how the story might end if I walked away angry. I opened my phone. A message from Bluestone. Looking forward to our call Monday. Let us know if there's anything you need. Then another. To Rewritten. From Dana. I'm proud of you. Whatever happens next, you did the right thing. I stared out the window for a while. Dayton stretched out below me. I wasn't sure if I wanted revenge anymore. I wanted clarity, closure, with my son, maybe even peace. But Mason Caldwell, he still wanted a war. It was a Wednesday morning when the headlines dropped. Stratusvantage CTO scandal, threatens $40 million contract. A photo of Mason, red-faced, walking out of the building with reporters chasing behind, was plastered across every tech news feed and investment blog within an hour. Bluestone had made their move. The contract was officially withdrawn. Their press release was short but devastating. We no longer have confidence in Stratusvantage's leadership or technical integrity. Shares plummeted 19% before the bell. I was on a Zoom call with Carter Maddox when the numbers came in. That's your work, isn't it? He asked, half smiling. I didn't deny it. Partially. But they did most of the damage themselves. Carter leaned forward. You still thinking about our offer? I nodded. Yes, Simmer. But I need to handle one more thing first. Take your time, he said. The offer stands, with or without the explosion. That same afternoon, Mason called. Twice. I didn't answer either time. Then a third time. I let it ring, stared at the screen, and finally picked up. Ryan, des sorts, he said, his voice hoarse, like he hadn't slept. I need you. That's a first. The board's voting tomorrow. They're planning to remove me. Karen's leading the charge. They've painted me as unstable, reckless, and they're using the system shutdown as proof. Was it not reckless? I asked. Was it not unstable to fire your most senior technical officer 10 minutes before a mission-critical demonstration? I panicked. Okay, he blurted. I didn't think. That's the problem. I cut in. You never thought it through. You let your insecurity turn a partnership into a dictatorship. And when I became a threat to your ego, you chose your pride over the company. I'm begging you. Ryan went into. I've put everything into this. Everything. I need your help to keep it together. Just speak to the board. Tell them we were working things out. I almost laughed. You want me to lie? No. Just to soften the story. Say it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't. He was quiet. Then came the final card. I'll make you an offer. You come back. As CTO, full control over all tech ops. I'll even give you my seat on the board. We can fix this together. I stood at my office window, watching the clouds roll over the skyline. You still don't get it, do you? I said, this was never about the title, or the seat, or the money. I didn't want to own the company. Mason, I wanted to build it. I wanted a partner who respected the work. And you, I exhaled slowly. You saw me as a tool to be replaced the second a shinier version came along. I was wrong, he said. I know that now. Too late. I hung up. The board removed him the next morning. Karen was appointed interim CEO. She released a video message thanking the team, acknowledging the recent missteps, and committing to restoring trust. Her first official act was to invite me back, not as CTO, but as external consultant for a 6-month stabilization initiative. I declined. I had already made my decision. On Monday, I joined Bluestone Capital as their new Director of Technology Strategy. My name was on the internal memo, not buried in footnotes, not mentioned once at the end. First Armament, Shriyer. They gave me a corner office, a 4-person research team, and a blank slate to design the city infrastructure platform Mason had always promised but never delivered. Dana brought me lunch that day. We sat together in my new office, sunlight warming the table, laughter echoing off the windows. "It suits you," she said, glancing around. "You look like someone who finally came home." "Maybe I do." Antonin. That afternoon, I received a package at the front desk. No return address, just my name handwritten on the label. Inside was a single item, a framed photo of me and Mason, taken 10 years ago at our first big client dinner. We were standing side by side, suits too big, grins too wide, two kids who thought they were building an empire. On the back, a sticky note in Mason's handwriting. "You were right. I was afraid." I placed it in the bottom drawer of my desk and never looked at it again. In the months that followed, Bluestone surged, with my systems, my protocols, and a team that respected the architecture. We launched 3 municipal contracts ahead of schedule, cities in Texas, Illinois, and Florida began integrating our adaptive infrastructure tools. No outages, no security breaches, no excuses. Karen stepped down as interim CEO at Stratus Vantage 2 months later. A new executive took over, someone from outside the company, someone I didn't know. Their recovery plan included a licensing deal with Bluestone, a quiet concession that they could no longer rebuild from scratch. Owen reached out once, an email, short. "You were a better mentor than I deserved." "I'm sorry," I replied. "Learn from it. Pass it on." That was the end of that. One day, while reviewing architecture plans for a citywide transit grid in Phoenix, Carter walked into my office with a grin. "You know what today is?" he asked. "What?" "6 months since you flipped the switch. We just ran the numbers. You've already added more value than we projected for your first year. Not bad for a guy who got fired over coffee." I said, "Still the best revenge arc I've ever seen." He laughed. I smiled. But it wasn't about revenge anymore. That phase was over. What I had now was clarity. A new chapter. One where I got to lead without playing politics, build without watching someone else put their name on it, and work with people who saw me not as a threat, but as a cornerstone. That night, Dana and I opened a bottle of champagne on the same porch where this whole thing had started. "So," she said, raising her glass, "do you miss it?" I shook my head. "Not for a second." She clinked her glass to mine. "To starting over. To finishing strong," I said. We drank beneath the stars. The silence around us no longer heavy with resentment, but full of possibility. Some stories end with betrayal. Others end with success. Mine ended with freedom. And for the first time in 15 years, I didn't just build the future, I owned it.